Gentlemen, the time has come once again to discuss things.
Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of Geeky Gentlemen. I'm Sid Part 2, joining me today is...
Steve Baxi.
Indeed. Steve has picked a review topic for us today. What comic book are we reviewing today, Steve?
Alright, today we are talking about the original graphic novel, Destroy All Monsters.
I love Godzilla, man. I'm so excited to talk about it.
It's funny because there's actually a poster for Destroy All Monsters, the Godzilla movie, in the background of the early pages of the first Reckless book. So apparently, they had that title for a while. But no, anyway, we're talking about Destroy All Monsters, a Reckless book, which is the third book in the Reckless series that Ed Brubaker and Sean Phillips have been doing for the last couple of years. As of now, there are 5 total, and I wanted to pick one to review. But it's really hard to figure out which one is the best representative. So I just kind of pointed and picked one and decided to pick Destroy All Monsters. But really, we could have picked any of them.
I mean, it's very cool. It definitely you definitely feel the inspiration from the old detective pulp novels kind of thing. Yeah. This is exactly the kind of comic I would have read if I was reading comics when I was super into my detective fiction in middle school. I was reading the fucking what's the name of it with the Lee Child fucking books.
Reacher.
Yeah, Reacher. I was reading a bunch of those. I was reading some fucking God, I can't remember the name of the other guy that Lee Child left a quote on one of his books, and that's how I found Lee Child. It was just fucking that whole vibe. I'm so frustrated. Yeah. I can't remember the name of the book, but I remember the fucking killing floor and the guy living in fucking upstate Michigan, and yet he'd end up in some fucking crazy situation where he had to kill 700 people because he was trying to solve a mystery.
Yeah, so going into that sentiment, just a little bit of background on this. Ed Brubaker and Sean Phillips have been basically a paired set for 15 years or so now. They really only do stuff with each other, and they've had basically a deal with Image that gets renewed every few years, where Image will just publish whatever they want to make. So they've got this basically just write whatever you want, publish however you want kind of deal going, which is pretty sweet. And at the start of the pandemic, or right before the pandemic, they were about to start a new ongoing series. And then when the pandemic hit and everything shut down, they weren't able to do that. So everyone just kind of was going into quarantine, and there was no real sort of concept of what to do anymore, and time was moving in a weird way. And so at the time, Brubaker just started reading a bunch of detective novels that he had read as a kid, and he just kind of fell into that sort of nostalgia comfort zone of all the stuff you would read when you were younger. So Parker books and Executioner books and Reacher books, all of those men's adventure novel, detective novel stuff. And he decided, instead of doing the ongoing, they're what if we just did our version of that? And so we decided to do Reckless. But the thing about Reckless that's even more impressive is, from the onset, the idea was, the reason these books became so ubiquitous and so popular for so long is that the way these writers used to work is that you'd have several come out very quickly. And so if you go to Donald Westlake's Parker books, you basically had 2 or 3 a year. And so it used to be like this insanely rapid turnout, and that's what made them so big and so popular, is like within the span of 10 years, you'd have like fucking 15 books out. And so the idea behind this was, initially it was going to be 3, and then Robert Kirkman told him to, no, you always quit at a weird number, do it up until 5, so it became 5. And so over the course of 2 years, this writer and artist pair, over the course of 2 years, made, drew, and released 5 hardcover 144-page graphic novels.
No, it's
So
insane. When you just told me, like, you told me 5 volumes, I'm like, oh, okay, so they've been doing this for a while. And then you told me at the beginning of the pandemic, and I'm like, no, that's what?
Fucking Sean Phillips pencils 20 pages a week. It's insane. Like, literally, they have done 5 OGNs in less than 2 years. Like, there is no other human being in the industry with this kind of output. It's insane.
That is crazy.
Yeah, it's absolutely nuts. And so, like, that's what it is it's basically just that sort of comfort food series of detective novels that released really quickly in succession and kind of found their own base. Destroy All Monsters is the middle one. There's Reckless, there's Friend of the Devil, Destroy All Monsters, Ghost in You, and Follow Me Down. But the way they're designed is that they're not volumes. You really can just read any of them in any order, just like you could with any of those old detective novels. The only bit of context that's really needed, even remotely, and even this isn't much, is that Ethan's backstory is that he used to work for the FBI. He was undercover and he got stuck in an explosion, and the explosion gave him a sort of weird brain damage that makes it so that he has difficulty feeling or expressing his emotions unless they're expressly intense. And so after that, he just became this kind of private investigator, kind of fixer dude who just like does things if people pay him and if it's the right kind of mystery. And as long as you understand like that sort of basic premise of like, he's a weird guy, he's kind of a fixer, he's got a shady backstory, but he solves your mysteries for you if you have his number, then you're fine. At that point, you can just read them in any order and get whatever you want out of them.
It's interesting. I don't know. I didn't really pick up on that aspect of it when I was reading this. I kind of just thought he was like your typical male lead in this type of story. Like you listed off all the examples. I'll refrain from continuing to go back to him. I just kind of thought he was like, I was like, oh, emotions are hard. I don't really get it. But every so often, I'll do something just really sweet, so you know I've got a heart of gold. Like that's just kind of the vibe. So the idea that it's like rooted in like a mental illness is just kind of a funny idea to me.
Yeah, no, it's kind of an odd thing to do, but I'm like, oh yeah, so he can be masculine in that sort of traditional way, but it's because he has brain damage, not because it's cool. We've not said what we think of this, but I mean, just to throw cards on the table, I've written about these books for a while now. I've basically written a review for each one as they've come out, except for the first 2. And I've written other like longer form articles about the books in general now. So I've written something somewhere along like 5 times about these books. But I love Reckless. It's maybe my favorite series of books. It's so good. I love all of them equally. It's hard for me to pick a favorite. Destroy All Monsters kind of gives you a little bit more stuff to talk about in a broad sense, because there's the history of California and some like political intrigue and redlining, but there's also that sort of like more melancholy noir existentialist thing about like people fading away and times moving on and getting old, and the relationship between Ethan and Anna. So there's a lot of meat in this one, but it does sort of, the more you read and the more context you get, the more you appreciate all of them independently. But I love these books. I think they're fantastic. Ever since I read the first one in 2020, there's not like been a single day since I've read one of these books where I have not just immediately wanted to go back and read them again. I've read all of them twice now. This one I've read 3 times because of the review, except for the newest one, Follow Me Down, just because it's so new. But I love these, so I'm curious what you think.
It was pretty good. I hate to be like, like I didn't hate it or anything. I don't want to sound like I'm gonna sit here and rag on it. I did enjoy it. It was pretty good. I don't like, at least on just initial read value, I don't really have like a lot of emotional or connections or a lot of like deep thoughts on it. I just kind of read it as an interesting, fun little piece of like just, I don't know, what is this genre? Can we just call it like male fiction?
Sean Phillips calls them like male adventure novels, like dime store paperbacks,
Yeah.
pulp fiction novels, detective novels. Like, there's not really like a clean way to say it because any one book is of the genre, but always does something a little bit different, so it's hard to kind of lump together. Like, Parker is not really like Reacher, and Reacher's not really like Executioner, and Executioner is definitely nothing like Claire DeWitt, and like it just kind of it's a weird sort of circle of books.
Yeah, so I don't know, like I didn't have a ton to really think about this. It just kind of was, and it just kind of like passed through me, and I found some stuff that was interesting in it. I didn't know about the corridor thing. That was really fascinating to me. But I don't know. Yeah, I'm sorry. I got very little on this.
That's okay. I could talk for the both of us. No, I'm kidding. I think one place maybe just to kind of start maybe in the broader sense is it's really hard to argue that Sean Phillips and Ed Brubaker are not at this point, if not the most prolific, certainly one of the most iconic comic book duos of all time at this point. Like, I was talking to Alfie earlier, and I was asking him to like name other iconic teams, and I don't just mean in the sense of like this one writer and this one artist paired up to have this one really good run one time. I mean in the sense of like these two people work together all the time and have a library unto themselves. And like you have Stan Lee plus 60s Marvel artist, so it could be Stan Lee and Steve Ditko, or Stan Lee and John Romita, or Stan Lee and Jack Kirby. But outside of that, I really don't think there's anyone else in comics that like is this prolific together. And it really kind of shows when you go back and you look at all their work where they just have each other's number to such a degree to where on the surface there's not necessarily a lot happening in this book, but you'd almost sort of describe it as like an artist's book or a writer's book where maybe the general audience doesn't get a ton out of it, which is also not necessarily true because these are really popular in the indie space. But you give this book to like an artist and they can talk all day about like why Sean Phillips is such a good artist, or you give the script to a writer and they can talk to you all day about why Ed Brubaker is a good writer, because they're just such a fine-tuned pair. And I didn't know this going in. Apparently the way these work is Ed will just like write a few pages and Sean will start drawing, and then he'll have to write more pages, and then Sean will draw more. And like the book's not actually finished by the time it gets to Sean Phillips for the art. Like he's just literally writing it as it's being drawn. And the insanity of that on its own, it makes me anxious because I have to like outline everything when I write. But the way these books, when you stack them all up together, and if you have them in physical volumes, you can like physically see on the sides that the act breaks are roughly identical for every book. So like the dude just knows instinctually beginning, middle, and end. Every single book is like almost identical in size, and you can tell the black pages are the same for each volume. It's insane. Like it's one of those things where it's like you can just kind of sit there and study like, how the fuck does he do that? How the fuck does he just like know exactly the amount of things that need to happen in the first part of the story before he's even written the ending yet? So that's really cool. And I'm really trying to like think of like people that come anywhere close to the level of writing or just output that these guys have. And I just don't think there is anybody. Like Scott Snyder and Greg Capullo have struck up a really good partnership since Batman. And then there's like other people that are kind of like in similar indie spaces, like like Nicole Gu and the guy who wrote Everyone Loves Tulip. Like there's people, or David Baker, that's his name, David Baker. There are people that like are cool partners. Alan Moore and Dave Gibbons did a lot of stuff together outside of Watchmen. Frank Quietly, Grant Morrison, obviously, but like none of them have written back to back this much stuff that I think I've ever seen, and I feel like that alone is kind of impressive.
I mean, certainly, and especially within the comics realm, it's so hard because each project seems to take so long to get going, and then by the time you're done with it, like a year or more has passed since inception, and you know the nature of the business, you kind of need to take on other work to supplement, and so it's hard to get those schedules to line up. I think you could make the argument that you could put like King and Gerard's up there, but they have a hard time lining up schedules and stuff as often as I feel like either of them would like to, you know. And
Yeah, for sure.
that's just like a nature of the beast kind of thing, because it's a very, you know, everyone's kind of coming and going. What you really need to do is you just need to be the writer artist, because then you can do whatever you want and it's on your own fucking schedule. And then none of your art will ever suffer.
And then you'll never get anything done because you have to write everything and draw everything and ink everything, color everything, and then there's 5 years and you've got one book.
Yep. I don't know. But the book itself, again, I don't want to feel like I was dunking on it. I kind of like, you're like, so what do you think of it? I was like, and I kind of heard like, don't you dare shit talk this book. I don't know. This is just one of those ones where it was very interesting to read. Again, I like the stuff about the corridor. I like the way that I like the, I don't know if stream of consciousness is the right way to describe the narration, but just the guy who's really bad at telling jokes narrating the story. That's what it is. He he has to like, oh wait, I forgot of this part. Let me go back.
Yeah, I love that so much.
So like that's
it's like fucking like Kiss Kiss Bang Bang almost.
Yeah, exactly. So it's that's just like a fun, cool little storytelling device, because you're not sure how much of it is actually needed information and how much of it is just character specific. Stuff that's there to build character, or stuff that's just thrown in because the writer had a funny idea about a like marriage getting torn apart by some kid stuffing diapers in the mailbox, and I'm like, that sounds real. I think he might have just pulled that out of the newspaper, or like heard it from a friend of a friend kind of deal. So I liked that. That was cool. It was a fun, and I think it's a to your point about like Brubaker as a writer and like kind of a master of his craft. It is an unconventional yet immediately endearing character trait that you don't even realize how effective it is until it's already like put him in your head, right? Like the way that the book starts off with, you see the fire starting and you see him running in and you see him talking about, that was the year I started to feel old. It was the year I started to make a lot of mistakes. I like that. It kind of immediately introduces you to a character. And it is really cool that you said this was the third of the series that came out?
Yeah.
It is really cool how perfectly this just introduces the character, and you really don't need to read anything beforehand. I at no point felt like I was lost or didn't understand where this guy was coming from, or like there was other stuff that I should have read before this or anything like that.
Yeah, it's one of those things where it's easy to do poorly. It's very hard to do well. But it's also one of those things you don't immediately notice unless it's done badly, where you're just kind of like in the thick of it from the very, very beginning. And detective novel style prose is like really easy to overdo. It's really easy to try and do earnestly, but just kind of comes off as tongue-in-cheek. And I feel like Brubaker's been doing this kind of story for so long, I feel like he doesn't have that problem. So getting him to like open this book with the year I started to feel old and talking about turning 40, and not even necessarily the sort of physical inconveniences of it that are there, where he just talks about like moving slower and like having to spend the first part of his morning to do all these fucking stretches, and then eventually he'll feel better, but not like what he used to, and that just sort of becomes a fact of life. But also just the way the book talks about the relationships that age has for different people at different points, where when you're approaching 30, it's a way different world than when you're approaching 40. And that sort of awkward relationship he's got with his secretary assistant, Anna, where she's like 10 years younger than him, and they've got this really nice platonic friendship, and Ethan's got very much by the time you're 40, right? Like there is this mentality of you kind of do just want your bubble. You do just sort of want to be settled. You wake up every day, things like hurt a little bit more. Bending down is rougher. Getting up off the ground is rougher. Walking is harder. And the older you get, the more you sort of cement yourself in like, I want to live here, and this is my house, and this is my day job, and like I want my bubble to be as closed as possible because I've lived through all the uncertainty already. Versus when you're going from 20 to 30 and the idea sort of becomes, oh, for 20 years of my life I was in school and I was confined and I had parents and yada yada yada, and now I want to get out of the bubble and I want to be free and I want to do other things. And so like both sides of that argument were like the fact that you open with Anna and Ethan on bad terms with each other, and then ground all of it in the fact that they do have this awkward relationship. And part of that tension is just the fact that she's younger than he is. And where he is in life, she is not. And that's going to be a source of tension that they can't necessarily outgrow. Ethan's all about, at this point, letting go of people from the past. And she's all about trying to explore and find new people. And that's hard to make work together. I thought all of that was really endearing.
Yeah, 100%. I like the idea of Anna as a character. I like the way that her backstory is handled. And then, really importantly, and I guess this does kind of put it above its neighbors in genre. Is I did appreciate the fact that at no point is there any kind of romantic tension between Anna and what the fuck's the main character's name?
Ethan Reckless.
Ethan Reckless. Jesus fucking
It's
Christ!
the greatest name ever, right?
This is the exactly. Never mind. I'm withdrawing this compliment as soon as I give it. I like that there is no like hint of a sexual relationship between Ethan and Anna here. They are like completely platonic friends, and he's got like maybe a little bit of like older brother, like fatherly kind of wanting to protect her, and kind of like keep the evils of the world away from her thing. But it's at no point is there any hint of sexuality between them, and I really, really appreciated that because it just, again, I've read stuff like this, and you could just see the version of this where he starts talking about like her panties or something, like, oh, I found her panties and I can smell I can smell her in the air or whatever. Like, you can just fucking see that happening if you've read this type of fiction before. There's a fucking trend going around a little bit ago, which was sex scenes that were very clearly written by a man, and they're all like fucking terrible. But one of them was like, her breasts had attitude. Just stupid shit. And like I remember
Her
reading,
breasts bounced boobily.
yeah. I just remember reading stuff. Her breasts were angry. Those were angry breasts. Just like, what the fuck is this? So it's fun to see this in a more just more down to earth, more refreshing, and I guess not even novel relationship. Because like the thing that it reminds me the most of would be Sin City with Nancy and what's Bruce Willis's character?
Fuck, I don't know. It's been years since I've read those books.
Yeah, I just remember that. Like, I don't think I ever read the book. I just saw the movie. But like that whole relationship where it's like, he sees her
Yeah.
as like this girl that he's got to protect, and then she's like attracted to him, and it's like such an awkward thing, but he can't help but enjoy that feeling. I'm like, it's just it's. I get what Miller was going for, but it's still kind of weird. Whereas this, just nope, completely. It's never addressed, never brought up, never hinted at or anything, and that's kind of all the better for it.
Yeah, the fact that like there is just a clean line of friendship between them, but also the fact that like you can kind of talk about things like Ethan getting jealous of the fact that Anna's dating someone, and not because he likes her, but because he's sort of grown accustomed and used to having her around, and that he does actually just kind of miss her when she's going around with someone else, especially if he's got those big brother wives of like, well, the guy's a jackass anyway, you know, like there's a level of just like you can do the same sorts of tensions that would be in a romantic relationship without ever actually giving them a romantic relationship. And that's again hard to pull off. It's really easy to do badly, and it's really noticeable when you do it badly. But when you do it right, it just feels like it's just the tiniest bit of well tuned, and it just makes everything roll off from there. This is the first book where Anna kind of becomes more of a focal character. She's kind of in the background the first two, and this one, according to Brubaker, was so much fun to write between the two of them that the fourth one, The Ghost in You, is entirely told from her perspective. The fourth and the fifth one are actually a cool kind of back and forth where Ethan is out of town solving some other case. So someone comes to them to get help, and she has to solve the case on her own. And then if you read the fifth book, it's what Ethan was doing while she was out solving that case.
Oh,
So
that's
that's
fun.
pretty cute. Yeah. There used to be old paperbacks that did the same thing, where like you read one book on one side and then you'd flip it over and it's a different book on the other side, and that's basically what they did with the fourth and fifth book.
That's pretty
But
cool.
you learn more about Anna's history and like her mom and stuff like that, and like what the relationship is between her and Ethan, and all of that stuff's really good. They do allude to at the end of this, which they have not yet explained or revealed in any way, that Anna does meet some kind of tragic end. And I feel like when you get to that final scene, where it's in the 2020s and it's the middle of the pandemic and people are wearing masks and Ethan's just kicking away at his typewriter, there is sort of this gut punch feeling, especially in lieu of the other books, of he is in a very different place than we are used to now. He's got a house, it looks like he's married or with somebody, and then Anna apparently died at some point. And there is that kind of bittersweet note that you end this entire book about growing old and missing people and drifting away with this really affirming note where they kind of come back to each other, only to have the last page be, and by the way, she died later.
Yeah, no, I like that though. That was
Yeah,
it felt very real because I mean that's what happens, right? It's like you see people that are younger than you. As you get older, you see people who are younger than you, and you always think, oh well, they'll be here long after I'm gone, and then naturally, no, people die when they die. You know, maybe it's something related to the cases that they're working or something. Who knows with where the story goes? But just because they're younger than you doesn't mean that they get more.
Yeah.
And I thought that that's just a really cool and again just realistic kind of life thing. So I like that quite a bit. That's fun. Go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, you go.
I was just gonna say I like that too, and there's a bit in this book in particular that's really always stood with me ever since I first read it, and it kind of became the linchpin of the pandemic piece I wrote for Comic Book Herald a year or so ago. But there's that moment where the case had gone badly. Anna decided that she was going to move across town, and Ethan goes into that whole speech about like, if you're across the 405 in California, you basically have just lived to a different country now, which in bigger cities is a thing, which is sad. But after that, he goes back to the theater and he has this moment where he is watching old movies, and he says he's thinking about all the people that he used to know, old lovers, family, friends, and then he like goes all the way back as he's watching these old movies, watching fucking Rear Window in one scene, and he remembers that when he was a kid he used to have a best friend back when he grew up on a military base, and then one day the kid just disappeared and he was devastated. And now he can't even remember the kid's name. And then he eventually just kind of stopped trying to remember. And like, there's this sort of really fundamental idea in this book of, at a certain point, the things that felt like they were the end of the world for you will just be completely removed from your life. And there's nothing you can do about it. Like, at a certain point, there is so much distance between these things that you can't even really conceive over what you were upset about to begin with. And Ethan, being someone that doesn't have access to his emotions easily, almost trying to rationalize and preempt that emotional reaction for Anna leaving, is really, really good and really sincere. And honestly, I thought that whole bit was really relatable, where like, you kind of get through another point where you're like, oh, that's another person I'll never talk to again. And you're just kind of trying to rush past the point of missing them so you could get to the point where you're like, oh, I remember them now. Funny how things work. Like, it's really affirming in that way, and I like that a lot.
Yeah, I think you talked about that before in another episode. I don't remember what the context was, but I read that scene and I was like, oh yeah, Steve told me about this. That's a good fucking moment. It's just so it's so incredibly human, right? And I really like that. And it's especially interesting, like, as a father, as a father of a 3-year-old, to read a scene like that, because it's not like a new thing that you come to as you get older and you get like more of those. You get those constantly throughout your entire life. It's just you get more and more used to dealing with them so that they affect you less so. If I take away something from Leah that she wants because she's misbehaved or whatever, it is the absolute worst thing that has ever happened to her. And like, literally, like, it's so weird as a parent, because like, I don't know, man, you lose something, right? Like, you lose your fucking phone or something, you're probably like mildly annoyed, frustrated, maybe you stress about it a little bit, but like, most grown adults, even if they lost their phone, even if it was important, if they, like, say you knew what happened to it, like you dropped it in a pool and it's like fucking dead, right? They're not necessarily going to stress over it to the point where they're like full on meltdown in tears on the ground. But if I fucking take her toy phone away because she's thrown it or like hit her mom with it or something, then it's over. It's like, for the next 10 minutes, I'm gonna sit here and cry. And it's gonna be like a whole fucking thing. And luckily I don't have to do that often because she's a good kid most of the time, but still, it's the exact same thing. You're still dealing with all of the same things. It's just when you're so little and you have absolutely no preparation for it and very poor memory, so you're not like aware of how often this happens, or aware of the frequency with which you have to deal with inconveniences or just bad things in life. You just you're not as used to it. So it's like, literally from day one, you go from this perfectly content in this warm, wet environment, and then suddenly you're just fucking popped out into the world and it's cold and there's light and you just fucking know what to do with that. So your only reaction is to cry. And that's just fucking how, and from there until you fucking die, you just get more and more used to how to deal with, the shit that you don't want to deal with. So there's a very, like, it's a very humanistic experience that he's conveying there, and it's just such a good scene that boils it all down so perfectly.
It comes in concert, and I think this was maybe the context you were remembering, but it's a really good companion piece to when we talked about Layla Starr, because you have that issue told from the perspective of a cigarette, and they say the point of life is to be smoked, and she goes on that speech about how every time you lose someone, you lose a part of yourself, and you get to that point where the more you do that, the more you realize that you have less and less to give. and so every bit of you becomes even more essential or even more important. And it's kind of the sort of reverse sentiment of that, not in a bad way, but just kind of the other side of that, of you do kind of get to a point of acceptance, and that's just part of growing up. That's just part of getting old. But that acceptance also comes with the realization that the older you get, the more you are kind of just losing a step. The more you are just kind of have to get used to the idea that the more you put out, the more you are willing to lose, because that's just how life works. And there's nothing necessarily wrong with that, but it is harder to accept the younger you are.
I agree.
But yeah.
So with all the big questions about life, the universe, and everything out of the way, we should maybe talk about the like actual plot of this book a little bit.
I figured you'd be interested in that, with all of the old school talk about real estate laws and literally stuff that used to happen in California in the 70s and stuff.
I mean, I was to a degree. It's not something, again, like, it was interesting to read Brubaker's afterword on the book, because like he didn't live in Los Angeles in the 80s and 90s, so he wasn't really aware of all that much, and he kind of discovered it by doing research in this book. And the whole thing about the corridor, about like the legal battle of extending a fucking highway, destroying neighborhoods and towns, and like completely gutting the city and introducing just massive amounts of crime because of all these vacant homes just right in the middle, splitting a community in half. Is like, holy shit.
Yeah, man.
And the fact that that's just all like the backdrop to the story, right? Like all of what happens there, everything that's about, that's not even like the thing the villain did. That's just part of what was going on in the situation that the villain of the book took advantage of.
Yeah, no, that was fascinating on its own. And the books in the beginning, not in the beginning, but like in the first one, the backstory with Ethan, how he was like in the FBI and everything. The backstory for that stuff is fun too in this context, because I don't know if you got this vibe from the conversation that he had with Anna at the diner about like how he was pissed that she might want to have kids because of what they're doing to the planet to have more people, or the fact that he was a surfer bro. But Ethan's like a hardcore hippie, and in the first book, when you get his backstory, the thing that sets him on his path to quit the FBI and like just be this private investigator is that he reads back then all of those classified reports from oil companies and corporations about the impact of global warming that he realizes were all being suppressed. And so when he goes through all that material and realizes, oh shit, we are killing the planet, people know we are killing the planet, and they're intentionally trying to pretend like it doesn't exist, it basically broke his faith with the system, and he went his own way. So he is just kind of a hardcore hippie. So when you get to this book and we're talking about like how ghettos are formed from situations like this, about essentially how political gerrymandering operates so that you consolidate these kinds of neighborhoods on their own, how they're under-supported and over-policed and stuff. Like all of that's kind of been an overtone of the series to begin with. It's never like explicitly Ethan versus the man in that sense, because it's kind of going off of that more sort of detective fiction style of like there is just abstract moral grays, and you really are just dealing with like the problem of the day, not the problems of society at large. But that is a thing that they've been doing through all of them. Like the villains of the second book are neo-Nazis. So stuff like that's kind of fun to read. And in this book in particular, I feel like this history was really cool to look up. And Sean Phillips, a dude who lives in England, who's only ever been to the US, I think like twice based on what he said, had no reference material for what California is supposed to look like. So him and Brubaker would like literally have to go through and find images of what these highways and these neighborhoods and what these streets were like in the 70s and 80s, now that basically none of that exists. So you can't just like go on Google Maps and go on Google Earth and be like, okay, let me draw this intersection, because it was so drastically different decades ago. So all of that extra research material to make all that feel more authentic is really cool.
It is really interesting. I guess I hadn't thought about the fact that Sean Phillips would not that Sean Phillips wasn't American. So that's interesting. That you'd have to like source the actual city streets and stuff because I don't know. It definitely feels like LA. It doesn't feel like it could be just Gotham City or whatever. I think it's more than just the way that he's referenced like actual city streets and stuff. I think a big part of what helps it feel so authentic is a lot of the colors that he uses. There's this very like warm shading to everything that does make you think of like just that California weather. That was well done.
Yeah, the colorist Brubaker and Phillips have been partners for like 15 years, but they've had several colorists over the years. Their most recent era of colorists has started in the criminal book, All My Heroes Are Junkies. From then on, all of their books are colored by Jacob Phillips, who is actually Sean Phillips' son. So he's a colorist and is an artist, and he has like his own ongoing books and stuff. And just fun side note here, because Brubaker and Phillips are the brand, that Brubaker and Phillips is the thing that sells the books. An ongoing thing they've been trying to do is people just buy their books because they're them, not because they're associated with any major title. And so in novels and prose novels, you start to notice that the bigger the author gets, the bigger the author's name is on the cover and the smaller the title is. So as these books go on, Brubaker and Phillips' his name is more prominent than anything else. But Jacob Phillips' name and really all of their colorist names are never on the covers because the brand is Brubaker Phillips. And apparently they had to be upfront with them about that. Of like, you're coloring these books, you're part of the team, you're going to get credit, you're going to get paid, but your name's not on the cover because the book is Brubaker Phillips. It's not Brubaker Phillips. So that's a weird thing. But all that to say, Jacob Phillips is the colorist for this. He's maybe one of their best colorists. And he has this thing in the first few Reckless books where LA basically just seems to exist on the sun's about to rise, it's the middle of the night, and the sun is about to set. There is no daytime. Daytime doesn't exist. It's always perpetually about to start or about to end. And I really like that touch because this book especially is about the past and aging and nostalgia. And so when you do that sort of constant anticipation of the day's about to begin or the day's about to end, you're always subconsciously hitting that emotional beat of things are always in transition, but they're not just in transition. They're about to move. You're never in the moment. You're always at the point where one thing becomes another. And so like that sort of solid moment of just enjoying the daytime doesn't really exist in this world that way. And also it probably just, like you said, it feels more like California when you just see the sunset like that on the beach.
Yeah. I don't know. It hits. It works. It looks good. It's funny that the book starts with him being like, it's the year that I got old, and then just now I'm surfing later in the book. I wasn't quite ready for that one. That felt very I don't know if that felt like a genre break, but it just didn't feel like something I was expecting based on everything that we'd gotten to that point.
Yeah, I guess part of it is also just 70s California is just not a thing I know a lot about. So like I don't understand Surfer Bros. I don't understand what that mentality was or how old the cap on surfing is. But apparently you could just do that your whole life. Another thing about Ethan that is interesting that comes from detective fiction is you kind of always have this character in the detective who's obsessed or hounded by a mystery. And so like they're kind of destructive in that way until they figure out what the truth is. Ethan has a sort of like a particular way of doing this where he talks about it more in the first and second book and then later in the fifth book of when he's on a case, it's like there's a pressure valve in him that's been stuck. and he physically can't do anything except go out and solve the case. And so he's like an insomniac where he like will not sleep. He doesn't have the ability to sleep. He can't dream. He can't surf. He can't do anything. He's just hounded by the mystery. And so you get that sense really heavy in the first two books. And then in this one, it's kind of not there. And the fact that it opens with the narration of it's the year I started to feel old, and the idea that in the middle of the mystery, before it's really been solved, he decides to just kind of try and ignore it and go out surfing, and kind of in that moment transition out of the character we kind of got used to is an interesting bit. It's not something you would know unless you've read the other books, but it's a cool little bit where it feels not like a surprise necessarily, but it feels different that he decides to go surfing and the mystery's not solved yet. Like the fact that he's like allowing something to hound at him and still kind of ignore it feels unique for him.
That's interesting. I think the one major character that we haven't talked much about, maybe characters. I think that both of these guys kind of coexist, connected to each other, is the villain and the client in this story.
Yeah.
So like the Ethan is hired by this city councilman who wants to take down this businessman that basically scammed his dad, and it's kind of his grift is he would reach out to businessmen of color who needed access to greater capital and work with them on an investment in order to kind of get his foot in the door on something, and then would screw them over and sell the investment off at the last minute to, purely for his own profit and personal gain, absolutely ignoring whatever it is they wanted to be seeking this investment in.
And also like pay off city officials to cause delays and stuff, and literally just flat out corruption.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And so the city councilman wants to revenge. He wants to ruin this guy, and so he's hired Ethan to basically dig up dirt on him. And fucking dirt does he find? It was interesting. I like that this book, it does the thing of, well, who really cares because this guy deserves it. But it also doesn't shy away from like showing the kind of like dirty, underhanded shit that Ethan has to do to like get to this place. The fact that he's like actually goes around and follows this guy that's been cheating on his wife and gambling and like doing all these socially unacceptable things and shit. And it's like, man, that I just feel like most of the time you'd see your main character portrayed a little less, scummy than that. It's like, oh no, I'm gonna let you get away with that, but I am blackmailing you. I don't know. It's just kind of like shitty, It was interesting.
Yeah, it's funny because when these books were announced, the joke was that Brubaker and Phillips were finally writing a heroic character because everything else they'd ever written was from the perspective of criminals, and then this came out and Ethan's not really a hero at all. He's still morally gray.
Mm-hmm. It's definitely interesting. I did like it in that regard. That was pretty cool.
Yeah, I like both that the politician and that the businessman don't come out of it with either of their hands clean. I like that moment where they've got like the perfect plan for the takedown with the incriminating photos and everything, but because the councilman senses a good photo opportunity, he causes a vice raid and basically blows the operation. It does eventually become his own downfall, but I do kind of like the idea that like Ethan, it seemed like he understood where this guy was coming from and kind of felt for him, and then immediately not only being trusting but kind of getting screwed over as just a tool being used by this politician, not necessarily in the same way the other guy was doing, but definitely in a way that makes them both feel culpable, which is pretty cool. And then Byron, the guy who sells Ethan the old movies, talking about how councilman's dad and that family meant a lot to that community. And even at the idea that, like, even if this guy was not the best in the world, even if was waging his own little private war here, it was still better than nothing. And that kind of almost nihilistic mentality a lot of these books have, where, like, there are no good guys, but there are bad guys that are less bad, and you kind of need to help them as much as possible, because without them you don't have anyone. I like that a lot.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I think all of this is just really well done. Again, it's one of those things where reading it, I didn't necessarily have a lot of thoughts on it, but then it's one of those books where I definitely think that as you just go further and further into it, there's more and more to find out and more to learn, and just it's a very rich book to discuss.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a lot of fun, because a lot of these books are just kind of, they seem really surface level. Like, the plot's kind of, it's involved, but they kind of hold your hand through it the entire time. There's a lot of, like, really flashy setups and payoffs, so it just feels like it's the perfect comfort food, right? And that's kind of what I love about them, is that they have this sense of, like, nostalgia and fun and adventure and sincerity that just kind of carry you through, and you read the whole book in like an hour and you're like, that was fun. But it leaves this lingering level of thought behind, these sort of weird existential questions, these interesting character beats, and the more they sort of compound, they compel you to kind of go back and read it again. And it's one of those things where, like, it's almost like water in your hands. You're holding it and it slips out of you, because it's such a easy, understandable, digestible experience, but it always kind of leaves its mark on you, and I really like that about it. I will say there's one thing about this book that I noticed on the third read now for this review that I don't understand why it happened. It's a weird thing, and it's probably the only thing I'd go out of my way to complain about, where it feels like it was kind of sloppy, and maybe the need to get this out was why they didn't go back over and fix this. Is that when you shift out from Ethan's side of everything up to the theater getting blown up, and then go over to Anna's side, the narration goes from first person Ethan to, like, really, really briefly first person Anna, to then immediately third person out of nowhere, and then back to first person Ethan.
I was gonna say weird. That was probably my biggest complaint about it. Is you know what's, like, worse about it too, is it's not just that shifting narration thing. The narrative device of this, as we were revealed at the end, is this is Ethan writing down basically his memoir, so he really shouldn't have access to that information. But two, just from, like, a comic book perspective, the narration, text, and lettering doesn't change when you shift character.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
That's not good. Like, that's just a kind of a poor man's way to do it.
Yeah, no, exactly. And, like, in a book that's, like, as clear and as tight and well done as this, that, like, really stands out when you notice it. It feels like that's something that immediately when you get the lettering pass, you should have gone back and fixed. So I don't 100% understand why that wasn't addressed somewhere. I don't feel like you really lose anything in terms of Ethan being able to retroactively explain the mystery to you if you just kept it from his perspective. The weird need to kind of shift to that third person voice so you can get from the issues of Anna's breakup up through her reuniting with Ethan felt kind of unnecessary. And maybe part of it was you kind of wanted to preserve the break in thought from Ethan getting knocked out in the theater to Ethan waking up in the theater. So, like, there had to be kind of a break in focus. But if that was going to happen, then the lettering needed to change. The focus character needed to change. You needed to, like, actually introduce a new perspective and not just kind of, like, crib on this really sloppy first person shifts to a different first person, shifts to a third person, shifts back to a first person. It was really weird.
Yeah, I'd agree. Not the best narration work right there. Yeah, that's kind of all I got on that one. I think I'm about out of stuff to talk about with this one. I think I am good. Unless
Okay,
you had anything else you really, really wanted to bring up.
I wanted to mention one last thing about the series and just Brubaker Phillips as a whole, and that's just with a lot of comics that get collected in trade, you kind of run the risk of paperbacks that are shitty. Like all of Marvel's new trades are just like these bottleneck thin, flimsy pieces of garbage, and then eventually they'll release like a deluxe hardcover that collects more issues, but the paper is still really flimsy. And like most like trades in general just kind of have that issue, especially after the pandemic where we're having all these supply chain issues. And Brubaker and Phillips are really aware that they have three separate audiences that overlap quite a bit. You've got the single issue people, you've got the trade people, and you've got the deluxe hardcover people. And they understood the idea was that you were kind of splintering your money by trying to have something in each market. And so part of the appeal to shift from single issue ongoing comics to doing these graphic novels, which they did a couple before Reckless to kind of test the water, was that you've consolidated all those people. The single issue people still go to the comic book store to buy it, the trade people still buy it, and the hardcover people still buy it. So all of the Reckless books are in these deluxe hardcovers that are super gorgeous with the painted cover, and there's no dust jacket, and the paper stock is really thick and really nice. So each of the books feels like its own little art object that you can hang on to. And I just love the way those books look on a shelf. They're just so cool. They're so distinct. They're printed so well that I don't feel like I'm going to tear the pages if I flip through them so fast. So if for like no other reason, you should just like go to Barnes & Noble and see if you can just like flip through the pages of the book because it feels so nice.
Okay. Just real good quality printing, huh? That's
yeah,
what
man.
we've decided to talk about in Geeky Gentlemen. Man, the
It's
print
important,
quality
man.
of these books. Oh, fair enough.
It fucking sells though, because there have been so many times where like I've resisted buying or reading something just because I hate the way it's collected. And so like the fact that they like care to go out of their way to like make the trades art objects, especially as someone that like buys a lot of fucking books and I like displaying my books all over the place. I like that the book not only is functional in being able to read it, but actually looks good on a shelf, which is a problem I think a lot of comics have.
Fair. All right. I think that's going to do it for us. Do you want to do a rating, or like it was mainly positives here?
I would just give it a 5 out of 5. So I don't really know what else to add to that.
Yeah, no, I mean, I really liked it. I'll give it a 4 out of 5 just because like it was good, but it just didn't like completely wow me, blow me out of the water. But I did really like it. So yeah, 4 out of 5. Close down movie theaters. That seems like that would actually be really expensive real estate to own, but you know, you do you, buddy.
It is a cool base of operations. It's just like, where do you work? I work at the abandoned movie theater where I solve mysteries for rich people.
I know,
It's
right?
just kind of neat. I'll give it 5 out of 5. Rich people identity theft.
Nice. Okay, so we need to talk about something next week. I should probably be the one to pick, I guess. What the fuck do I want to talk about?
Alfie.
Yeah, we've been doing a lot of reviews lately, so we should probably do a discussion topic.
Yeah.
Man, I don't fucking know what I want to talk about. Can we talk about ninjas?
What?
Do you think we could manage to have an entire discussion just about ninjas, like what they actually are, their use in fiction, their like aesthetics? Do you think we could manage an hour-long conversation about ninjas?
I feel like you need to give me something a bit more concrete, but
No,
maybe.
no, just geeky gentlemen ninjas. We'll just
Ninjas.
if it's related to ninjas, you can talk about it. How's that for fucking? You want to talk about Ninja Turtles? It's got ninja in the name. I cannot deny it. You have approved the requirements for the docket.
I mean, you know what? That's fair. We could spend an entire hour talking about how the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles are a ripoff of Daredevil.
Yep.
So, hell yeah, we can make that happen.
We could talk about fucking Ninja Assassin, the 2009 film from the Wachowskis. We could talk fucking anything. Just
Ninja Assassin is fucking wild, man.
ninjas.
What's the difference between ninjas and samurai? Who would win in a fight, a ninja or a samurai?
Yeah, exactly. Ninjas. Let's go. All right. Everyone, thank you so much for watching. Until next time, I'm the Philosopher.
And I'm the ninja.
And we are your geeky gentlemen. And we will be discussing things. Ninja, please.